is the right way. I might say, nobody doing it better. Y'all some lightweights. Malik Wright, up all day and all night, pushing all the buttons up to something till it's alright. He looking at it from all sides and angles. Got a stripes on his body like he played for the Bengals. Oh man, there's no one discussing it. They came, they stayed, they either did it or done it. Man, I love it, cause all they ever do is win. So kick that, relax, the TWSN.
Thank you guys for joining me for another episode of the Sit Down with Malik Wright morning show. I'm your host, Malik Wright, joined by my co-host as always, Daniel Alameda. We're going to be discussing week 2 of the NFL and so much more. If you guys could do us a huge favor, give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on post notifications so you guys don't miss when we go live or when we upload content. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Daniel, so Bryce Young was announced that he would be benched in favor of veteran quarterback Andy Dalton. And, you know, a lot of the people who didn't think Bryce Young was the best quarterback in his respective draft are starting to take laps. A lot of people who felt like Bryce Young was not the guy for the Panthers are starting to take victory laps. And a lot of people are writing this off as this is Bryce Young's end, basically, that he does not have a future, that he is a bust. And you know what? I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are, as well as everyone in the comment section. I'm really curious to hear what you guys' thoughts are on the whole Bryce Young discourse. But Daniel, what are your initial thoughts? What was your initial reaction when you heard that Bryce Young would be benched in favor of veteran quarterback Andy Dalton?
So my initial reaction was to do some research. And what I want to do some research was see what the history was of former number 1 overall picks getting traded. And I went back, obviously, and did a little bit of that research. And it's very rare that, number 1 overall picks first off get traded and that number 1 overall picks first off get benched within the first, 18 starts of the NFL. And I think that's my biggest takeaway from this is there's 2 sides to it. I think this could be a smart move in the sense that it does give Bryce Young some time to go and get some experience from playing from behind the starter. But at this point, I saw a report that came out that said, Bryce Young was not expecting this. And it, brings me to believe that, hey, maybe Bryce Young in this Panther situation just isn't going to work out. And that's what concerns me, right? If you headed into the season, Dave Canales, and said, hey, we're going to take this slow with you, Bryce Young. But after a brutal 2 games, having him sit behind Andy Dalton, and what's tend to have happened in Andy Dalton's, Panthers career is Andy Dalton will come in for a couple games and then he gets hurt and then the guy has to come back in and play again. So that's what concerns me right now is Andy Dalton is going to get snaps. And I believe that the Carolina Panthers are a better football team right now with Andy Dalton starting. But that's what concerns me, man, is are they looking to be a better football team right now, or are they looking to build with their franchise quarterback? And another part of this discussion is I think Dave Canales and Dan Morgan, the GM, are looking to save their ass, and rightfully so, right? This is their job. Dave Canales, at the end of the day, if Dave Canales and the Panthers shit the bed, and this could be his last chance getting a head coaching gig. So he's looking out for the betterment, in my opinion, of the current state of this team right now and not Bryce Young's future. And I think that's where the dilemma lies. And I think that's where I don't think that I see a true future with Bryce Young being the franchise quarterback of the Panthers. I don't right now. And maybe I'm looking at it and I'm reading too deep into it, but I think I see a Carolina Panthers team that is looking to save their ass right now, that is looking to look a lot better than how they got mollywopped in the first 2 games. And that's where I'm looking at Bryce Young, and I'm not out on Bryce Young. That's my biggest takeaway from this, Malik, is I am not out on Bryce Young. I know what I saw with him at Alabama. He is a guy very similar in the S to a Tua Tagovailoa, where they need a great situation around him. If you throw Tua into a situation like the Carolina Panthers, fresh out of college, you would have seen the same thing. We saw it with Miami. He had some very poor moments in the early days with Miami. I mean, it's almost a very reminiscent story. Go look at what Miami Dolphins did. Brian Flores, boom, what did they do? They went and they benched him for Ryan Fitzpatrick. They brought Tua back, and then they benched him again for Ryan Fitzpatrick. And what was the overall sentiment that happened? They fired the head coach, brought in a new head coach, and that head coach in the organization, they added talent, traded for star wide receiver Tyreek Hill. You go add talent on the defense and you implement a scheme for your quarterback that is quarterback friendly and that simplifies his job. And right now, Bryce Young's job is not simplified. And I'm not going to, go two ways about it. Bryce Young has looked terrible. He's looked trash. He has looked awful. But does that mean he is a terrible quarterback? And does that mean he can't succeed? No, the dude is 23 years old. And I go look at some of these cases of these other quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, perfect example. What did he do? Went to a couple other teams, found himself, and is now currently potentially the franchise quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Go look at Sam Darnold. His early days with the New York Jets, he was, highly touted as this franchise quarterback. He's going to save the Jets. Went and shit the bed with the Jets, left, and now you go look at what he's doing with Minnesota. Very similar story to Baker Mayfield, and I think we could see something with Bryce Young like this, and I think it's still far too early. The dude has started 18 games, and I'm not out on him. I still think Bryce Young can have success, and I think Bryce Young can still be some team's franchise quarterback. How I look at it right now, I don't think that's what the Panthers, and once again, I see what the Panthers are doing. They're trying to save their ass. They're trying to save the season. I'm not out on Bryce Young. I still think he'll be a good quarterback. For the time being, you got to try to win football games. Andy Dalton right now gives you a better chance.
So with that thought process, I think this is what happens when you have an ownership group that meddles often, right? I think this is what happens when you have an ownership group that meddles quite often with things, and they don't allow you to necessarily run the ship the way that you want to run the ship. Dave Tepper is a guy that everyone knows, a little bit of a hothead, probably a little bit too involved. And, I'm never going to fault an owner for running his team the way he wants to. Just don't be surprised if you get the results that you get because of that. So I think when I look at it, I think that this wasn't a Dave Canales thing, personally. I personally think he may have been pressured into doing this because when you look at it, maybe they are looking at it like feeling like the season is literally slipping away, and maybe not by the numbers, but more so by the overall enthusiasm when it comes to the team, the locker room chemistry. Again, one of my favorite things is, hey, you know what? I'm just a guy with a hot mic. I don't know what's going on in that locker room, right? Obviously, you could talk to people, you could ask around and stuff like that, but no one truly knows what goes on behind those four walls. And I think the situation, it sucks a little bit for Bryce Young. I think it's gonna be very difficult for Bryce Young to rebuild in Carolina. I think it's gonna be very difficult for Bryce Young to be rebuilt in Carolina and be told that he is the guy. The bigger issue that I have here is, what does that do for that guy's confidence long term, right? He was given the keys way too early. He was given the keys way too early, and I think that's something that we can all agree upon. Andy Dalton probably should have started for as long as he could. Everybody doesn't need to be thrusted into a situation where they're called upon right away. Maybe it's okay to just rely on your veteran quarterback, Andy Dalton, which is why you have him in place, right? And you were putting together a formidable roster, but that's a bigger issue. That's a bigger issue. The bigger issue is the culture when it comes to these young quarterbacks in the NFL. That if you get drafted with a high pick, there is pressure not only on you, but pressure on the organization to start you right away. And let's talk about it. When a young quarterback is, they say, hey, you're going to be the backup. It's almost like media pundits everywhere start to magnify whoever the incumbent starter is, right? And look at, hey, when you struggle, we're going to wait until you struggle or till you get hurt or whatever the case may be. And then we're going to move in. We're going to move in. We're going to move our guy we drafted with the first in the first round or with a high pick and make him the starter, because that's the pressure. It's almost like you're waiting for the opportunity. So you're not actually approaching the season with the thought process that, hey, the veteran that's coming in, we're going to be all in on him and allow him to build, allow him to grow. Even if he gets hurt and he comes back later, he's still going to be the starter. It's almost like the culture is waiting for that guy to struggle in order for said player to be thrusted into the spot. And that was what happened with Andy Dalton early on. That's what happened with Andy Dalton early on when Bryce Young's tenure was where it was. It was like there was clamor from the organization, like, hey, let's make this guy a starter, throw him into the spot. Obviously was not ready, and it showed. It showed. So I don't know. I struggle a little bit when I see some stuff like this when it comes to Bryce Young, because I think that long-term wise could do a lot more damage to the guy's confidence. But again, I think the important part to realize about this is where you go as a quarterback matters. Where you go as a quarterback matters. It could be the difference between you being successful and not being successful. My thought process on this is letting it play out, see what happens, but still rooting for a guy like Bryce Young. Like to see good things happen to good people. He's a good guy. And yeah, it just stuck. It just sucks a little bit. And this is a tough spot for Dave as well.
Yeah.
Right. To be this ownership, the organizational structure with the Panthers seems to be very unstable, I would say. And it's a lot of pressure on guys to try to approach it every single day and be excited.
Yeah, and the thing that sucks about it is you go look at Dave Tepper. He's been there, what, 7 years? How many coaches they ran through? 7, Malik. They ran through 7 head coaches in the span of 7 years with Dave Tepper as their, the owner. And that's what is very critical and very concerning about the situation. Go look at what Dave Canales even said. And yes, it obviously could have been his decision, but I'm with you with this. The day after the game or the day of the game, he said Bryce Young is still our quarterback. He's our quarterback one. And then yesterday he went out and he made comments. Obviously, we don't know what's going on, but he said, yeah, there are, was asked, was Dave Tepper involved? He said, there were a lot of parties involved. And he said, this is what's doing right by the team. So if you can read between the lines there could be, obviously, and I'm sure there is a big influence if you are the owner. And we'll see. I think we'll see how the season progresses, but I wouldn't be shocked once again if I don't think we've seen the end of Bryce Young this season with Carolina. It's still only week 2. I think we'll see him, suit up again for the Panthers, and we'll see how they go from there. But it's not looking too hot so far. So they got a couple big games this upcoming 2 weeks, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how the whole thing pans out. And again, I think for me, I'm just looking at it like, hey, you know what, these young guys got to get an opportunity to prove themselves and grow and learn and make mistakes before we just throw them to the side. That's just my thought process. If you guys could do us a huge favor, give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and turn on post notifications so you guys don't miss when we go live or when we upload content from the TWSN studios. Right now, I want to bring in TWSN analyst, our guy Parker Blake, to talk some of the takeaways from NFL in week 2. Got a list of things that I want to get Parker's opinion on and have this discourse with him. So without further ado, Parker Blake. How's it going, Parker?
Good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It was, again, another fun week in the NFL. A very weird week, I would say, in some aspects, but there's some stuff that I want to talk about. Obviously, we had the Bryce Young discussion, but I want to talk to you more about some more stuff. Let's talk about Trevor Lawrence, man. Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know this is a discussion Daniel feels very, very passionate about. And I'll say this, what I thought, I can't speak for everyone else, but I thought the Jaguars could be going into the season has not materialized just yet. And that causes a lot of people to be out on a guy like Trevor Lawrence. But I thought that some of the comments made by Travis Etienne was very, very telling. How he said, we don't need talented guys. We need guys that are hardworking and guys that want to win. So it makes me think that maybe, even though the Jacksonville Jaguars went out and tried to improve their roster via the draft, via free agency, obviously a couple of years ago, they brought in Doug Peterson, the former Super Bowl coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. It makes me think, though, the culture in Jacksonville might not be everything that is cracked up to be. And for me, Parker, before I let you say what you need to say, it kind of all stems back to that loss, not the loss, the collapse almost that they had last season when they had everything in front of them. And they just started reeling off losses over and over and over again. For me, when I look at it, I say, I don't know if this Jacksonville Jaguars team under this regime could build in the way that we were hoping they could build. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is the issue. I don't think Trevor Lawrence lost all his talent. And I know there are those people out there who probably feel that Trevor Lawrence might be the issue, or maybe Trevor Lawrence can't be the guy for Jacksonville. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, and then I'll swing it over to Daniel.
Yeah, no, I think, the biggest thing when you're trying to build, a team to have long-term success is having that foundational leadership, whether it's coming from the coaching staff. And if, I know Trevor Lawrence has had some interesting coaching situations in his career, especially early on. If it's not going to come from the coaching staff, it has to come from the players. And so, I mean, if you can have a team that the players can build around each other, I mean, that's still a recipe for success long term. However, if you're not able to handle adversity well, or you hit, some of these issues where you're losing these games and you're not able to bounce back, and you start, have that internal strife, almost like we saw with the Eagles down the stretch last season, where you're starting to fight amongst yourselves. Like someone has to take ownership of that locker room, whether it's going to be the head coach, whether it's going to be your quarterback, whether it's going to be veteran presences, whether it's on the O line or the defensive side of the ball. I mean, someone in there has to take accountability and, set the standard and hold the standard for what's, what we want to do as a team, as an organization. And I feel like, when you see, even if it's a short term or few games spiral as some of these teams, it's when you're losing that, or when the figurehead that's been that for your team is maybe checks out. That's the concerns I had when, every time Joe Burrow goes down to Cincinnati, where it's like, if he's supposed to be this outspoken leader on the team and he goes down and kind of checks out for the season, what do you have left? And so that's where I wonder how much of that is going on in Jacksonville right now.
Completely. And I think that's my biggest concern with this team, man, is like, first off, they're 0-2, and you got to go into Buffalo next week and face the Buffalo Bills with the chance to go 0-3. And that would be a horrendous start for this team. And I think for a team that had such high expectation, I think that's the biggest difference within these organizations, right? Is when they have these expectations, they don't, come to fruition. What's next, right? You went out, you added all this talent on offense, and right now some of them are obviously injured, like Evan Ingram. Takes some time to get to, in communication with these guys. But they even said it after yesterday's game. Hey, if that's the measuring stick for the NFL, we're not there right now. So, Park, my question to you is, what's it going to take to get these guys over the hump? And when we talk about Trevor Lawrence, right, I think it's time that we have the conversation, right? Where does he rank in the NFL? Because I do think that he is a very talented quarterback, but is he the type of quarterback that is going to uplift the talent around him, like to a superstar level, or is he a guy that really just needs a good situation around him? So that's my question to you, right? Is what do they need to turn it around? And Trevor Lawrence, is he, potentially that top 5 S quarterback, or where do you have him?
Yeah, I mean, first off, when I was evaluating Trevor Lawrence coming out, I never saw him as a guy that was going to take over a game and go win those games down the stretch. I think he's a great, not necessarily game manager. I know there's a negative connotation with that, but I think he's a great, like, a guy you can get in there. He can run your system for you, and then he can make big throws and big plays at times. But I don't think he's ever going to be one of these guys on the stretch that, coming into the fourth quarter, you expect him to take the game over. I think sometimes that's been put on his shoulders. I think sometimes he's delivered, but I don't think that can be the expectation for him. However, I do want to see him utilize BTJ at LSU a lot more, Brian Thomas Jr. I think he's a guy that can really be explosive for this team, and I think it's kind of hit and miss. And again, I feel like it's all just very disjointed right now, and that's, usually when you see NFL teams going through struggles, I know it's only been 2 weeks, but it's because they're just not really gelling. It's not really cohesive, and I think they just seem like one of those teams where when they catch their stride, they're one of the hardest teams to play in the NFL, but when they're kind of off kilter, they're not there, then it's really hard for them. So I think the biggest thing I need to see from them moving forward is they need to not only establish an identity, but they got to stick to that and then trust in that process. And that's really how they can kind of get back in that groove and let Trevor Lawrence get comfortable and let him be the quarterback that they want him to be.
Completely. And I think that's where I'm looking with the Jaguars team, man, is they got a brutal schedule. And I think there is time to turn it around. Like I said, and you went out in both free agencies, you really went in, you went balls to the wall. And in the draft, they added some good pieces. Brian Thomas Jr. has looked elite. And I do think that last week's matchup is the perfect matchup for them because it punched them in the mouth. You're not getting an easy matchup against the Cleveland Browns, especially with that defense. And I think that's where we'll see with the Trevor Lawrence-led Jaguars. And, just keeping it there real quick, what's your overall prediction? We can talk about, like the AFC South, but where do you think that the Jaguars rank, within their own division?
This AFC South it's one of the most interesting divisions every year because you come into the season, you have high hopes for the Texans, you have high hopes for Anthony Richardson and the Colts, and then you come out and it's the Colts look like they can't get out of their own way. The Texans look like monsters in week one, and then
One second.
come on,
Who in the hell
come
had
on.
high hopes for the Indianapolis Colts?
I did. I had high hopes for the
Let's
Colts.
talk about that then, bro.
No,
Come on, man.
I was really just excited to see what Anthony Richardson was able to do. I had a lot of faith in what he was able to do. However, I didn't love him as a prospect. I was kind of more just excited to see if he was going to come out and be this crazy athlete with the cannon. And I really felt like preseason for me, it was like the Colts are either going to be a juggernaut or they're going to be slipping and falling over the season. I feel like we went definitely that way as the season's gotten going. So I really feel like it's come down to the Texans and the Jaguars in that division for me. Battling for that one spot. And I feel like the Jaguars, again, if they're able to hit that stride, the Texans have plenty of issues on their own. I feel like they have too many weapons that they don't even know how to handle right now. They're not able to stay balanced. They're not able to distribute the ball well. So I feel like whichever one of those teams is able to catch fire and really figure out what they're doing the earliest and stick with that is going to be the team that wins that division.
I think that's fair. I feel like we beat up on the Jacksonville Jaguars a little bit. I was never really too high on the Colts. Just want to throw it out there again. But before we jump to that, and I didn't even plan to talk about this, but I think for me, Anthony Richardson never was a guy that put it all together in college.
Correct.
I had a hard time seeing him put it all together in the NFL. He has all of everyone's favorite word, the intangibles, to be successful. He has all the intangibles to potentially be a very good quarterback in the league. But the talk in the offseason about Anthony Richardson was crazy, right? MVP type candidate, people were saying this guy has all the makings of putting together a top 5 roster for the Colts offense. I mean, it was a lot of just outlandish takes. The best player on the Indianapolis Colts, still in my opinion, not named Quentin Nelson, is Jonathan Taylor. That's just my thoughts. Jonathan Taylor is still the best offensive player on the Indianapolis Colts, not named Quentin Nelson. And even
they
Quentin
don't
Nelson,
use him a lot. That's the issue, right?
Yeah, I didn't understand that at the end of the game where he was just he was riding the bench for the last 4 minutes. That was what was crazy to me. So, and Gary Jellison saying I'm a Texans truther. To be clear, Gary, I was a Jacksonville Jaguars truther at the beginning of the season. I thought, and I still believe they could still put it together. I thought the Texans might have regressed a little bit. But in my thought process, I just still feel as if like the Texans are probably going to be able to take advantage of this depleted division if these teams can't get it together. That's just my thought process. Keeping the conversation rolling, let's talk about the Eagles. While you're here, do us a favor, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications. Also, drop your questions down in the comment section for Parker, for me, for Daniel. We'll try our best to get to them. Let's talk about the Eagles. The Eagles fell to the why am I drawing a blank right now? The Philadelphia Eagles fell to the
Falcons.
The Falcons yesterday. See, Daniel's not even helping me. He's just shaking his head. Like, yeah,
I was trying to stay out. I was like, Daniel will get to it.
Yeah, like I'm looking at him. He's just like, yeah, you'll get it. You'll spit it out. The Eagles fell to the Falcons. And my thought process was
it was bad.
It was bad because Jalen Hurts is still what I said he was. We glorify this guy. Listen, when people talk about Jalen Hurts and they mention him in the top 3 quarterbacks, top 5 quarterbacks, I lied. Nobody ever mentioned him in top 3, but top 5 quarterback conversation. People are going to point to, well, he was playing without A.J. Brown. And last I checked, Dallas Goedert's still there. Last I checked, right? Devontae Smith was still there. Listen, great quarterbacks can outplay bad coaching. Great quarterbacks can uplift their team, especially when they're missing guys. You can't tell me A.J. Brown is the missing ingredient for the Philadelphia Eagles team that has been to the Super Bowl, that has been perennial playoff contenders, that have won their division. You can't tell me that the A.J. Brown is that big of a missing piece to that Eagles team to where if they don't have an A.J. Brown, they can't function. And if that's the case, then why are we talking about Jalen Hurts in the top 5 quarterback discussion? And I think that's a fair assessment to have. I don't know. I don't want to discredit the Falcons defense because they did some really good things yesterday, especially that clutch interception that came up. To me, I just look at the Eagles and I feel like the Eagles have one of the best rosters in football. And there's no reason why that team should be losing to a Kirk Cousins-led Falcons team. Just my thoughts. Parker, what are your thoughts? And then we'll let Daniel go.
Yeah, no, again, it's like I said, it's like the Jacksonville Jaguars situation where when this team's hot, they have one of the best rosters in football. They have one of these rosters that can go out there, they can compete with anybody. But when they seem to struggle with adversity lately, like recently, right? Where when they get down or they run into issues throughout a drive, I mean, they have a really hard time bouncing back. They don't have that cohesiveness on the sideline or within the offense or the defense to really bounce back and be like, no, we're going to go get this. We're going to make this happen. We're going to go make that game-changing play. They just kind of lean on individual players at times. And then I feel like they're always looking for like we didn't have this. We didn't have that. I mean, this is a top offensive line unit. They have Saquon Barkley behind it. They have, like you said, Devonta Smith. They have Dallas Goedert. They have Jalen Hurts, who some people revere as a great quarterback in the NFL. And again, like you said, I've never seen that. And so when you throw this offense out there, it should be able to work. But it also feels like they kind of come into that and they're like, oh, well, if we don't have A.J. Brown, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this happen? And it's like, no, I mean, you have plenty of help around the field. You just got to go and make it happen. And that's what separates quarterbacks in the NFL. You're going to have guys that can get out there and they can make it happen. And then there's quarterbacks out there that are going to go out there and they're going to lean on their defense. They're going to say, hopefully we can get a defensive stop. Hopefully we can, get a game-changing play. And that just doesn't happen. Some of these teams, just when that doesn't happen, it just feels like they implode. And so now coming off of this, heartbreaking loss for the Eagles, it's going to be very interesting to see how they bounce back. I believe A.J. Brown's out again next week. We'll see how they bounce back and what that looks like for them moving forward. Because, again, some of these teams like the Eagles, like the Jaguars, have a very, very hard time bouncing back from those tough losses, especially if they have a crutch that they can lean on.
And I'm sorry to cut you off. Let me just say this. Is it fair to say Jalen Hurts is a extremely talented game manager? Is that fair to say?
That, yeah.
He's a game manager who I believe is a threat with the ability to run the ball as well.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say. I think that okay, this might sound a little crazy. I think the gap between Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts isn't that massive, in my opinion. I don't believe that the gap between a Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts is that massive. I think that the one thing Jalen Hurts brings is his ability to run the football consistently and be a threat. And you, as a defense, you always have to be mindful of that. But when I look at it, I think that they're both game managers. And you can be a franchise quarterback and be a game manager. You hope that your franchise quarterback has the ability to be the game manager, especially at a pivotal moment where the game is on the line. But I think the drop off between Jalen Hurts and Bryce and what do you call it? Brock Purdy isn't that massive. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment to make. And I think why that is because you go look at the efficiency that Brock Purdy plays with, and then sometimes with Jalen Hurts. I think especially in the game script without a guy like A.J. Brown, they do kind of put him in more of that game managing role. And that's the part that kind of pissed me off after yesterday's game is, yes, Darius Slay got cooked many times. I saw a lot of Eagles Twitter saying, it's our defense. It's our defense. Yeah, scored what, 15 points? 15 points? And that's what irritates me is that shouldn't be the discussion. Yes, your defense does need improving there. Linebackers or secondary, that's always been the question. Even the running game, the rushing defense, especially, they got gashed by Josh Jacobs. But at this point, you really do got to look at your offense. And then there's even, you have to question like Nick Sirianni, the play calling multiple times, the game management at the end of the game where, it's a third down and then you can run the clock out. The Falcons don't have any timeouts and you go and pass it. And I saw once again at the end of the game, Saquon Barkley dropped the pass, but you can't be relying on that at the end of the game.
Well, we have a comment in here from our guy, Sean Brennan, residential Chiefs fan. He says, Malik, you can't put this on Hurts. This is solely on Barkley and the defense. Barkley catches that ball, the game is over. Now, here's what I'll say to that. And I mean this at my core. No matter if it's a team that I'm rooting for, at the end of the day, no game should come down to one play. We shouldn't sum up an entire 4 quarters down to one play. We shouldn't. There were things that led up to whatever the debacle was that, produced the outcome and the results that it did. Mm-hmm. I think oftentimes, obviously in sports, we magnify a single play, obviously, because that was like the last hope. That was the opportunity to seal it. But the fact of the matter is, one play does not define an entire game. there are always points that lead up to it. You understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So for me, the Philadelphia Eagles were the team that were at home. They should have been able to control this game. They should have been able to beat a Falcons team that did not look impressive week 1 and honestly didn't even look overly impressive week 2.
Mhm.
You were able to do some things. You were able to keep them from targeting Kyle Pitts on a consistent basis. You were able to do some nice things. But I would have been reliant more on that Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts-led team that has been to a Super Bowl, that has won their division, that have been they've been guys, a team that has lived in the playoffs, right? I would have expected them to be able to beat a young Falcons team that's still rounding into form.
Yeah.
That's just my thought process on it.
Well, they should have. And that's where it comes down to. They had this game in the palm of their hands. And you go look, and obviously it's just a joke, but Kirk Cousins on primetime has been awful. And Kirk Cousins didn't look amazing. So I go look at, there are a lot of blame to go around. But I guess like my question to Parker would be, how much of the blame do you put on this offense, right? And how much of the blame do you put on Jalen Hurts? And is it salvageable? Because the fact of the matter is, of their past 9 games, they've lost 7 of them. And that's the truth, right? Yes, they snuck one out week 1, but they are 2-7 in their past 9 games. Is this on Sirianni? Is it on Hurts? Parker, what do you think?
Well, that's where, looking back to last year, this is a team that going into the playoffs was talking about firing their coach. They were going in and they were going to play playoff games, and they say it was almost like, it felt like the conversation of, if we don't win this playoff game, we're going to fire our head coach. And that's, I mean, that's more from the fan base, not necessarily the front office. But when you're even having that conversation, it feels a little crazy to me. But I think what you brought up, I mean, with Kirk Cousins not being a great primetime quarterback and not really a great quarterback in general, you're going to let him orchestrate this game-winning drive that almost like looked like it was just impressive, right? Where it's like, wow, you can't. This Eagles defense is supposed to be able to stop stuff like this. And that's where, when you look at it again, you have to pinpoint where that's coming from. But at the end of the day, I worry about, Jalen Hurts' ability to finish a game off, but it's also looking around the team. You have to be able to lean your defense from time to time. And when your defense can't stop a Falcons offense that, again, hasn't looked great, and they did well, I mean, limiting points, but how much of it was the Eagles defense being good or the Falcons offense not performing well? And that's where, when you're in this NFC East division, which I feel like is up in the air right now, the Cowboys look at like an interesting team to watch. The Eagles look like they're kind of fluttering. I mean, it's going to be an interesting division to keep an eye on, but I feel like the Eagles are still going to be a team that's going to compete for that wild card spot. But is this going to be an NFC South, issue where you're going to get an 8-9 team in the playoffs again, or are you going to figure it out and you're going to get there and one of these Eagles or Cowboys teams is going to figure it out? But I think overall with the Eagles, you have to start looking not only at your quarterback. I know everyone always wants to blame the quarterback, but what, like you guys kind of hinted to earlier, when you look at Sirianni, what are you doing to put your team in a successful position? I know there's people talking about that final play for the Eagles where, it's supposed to be a read. If Barkley's open, it's a throw. And if he's covered, Jalen's supposed to go. But at the same time, why are we even considering throwing the ball right now? Yeah. Why are we considering stopping this clock on a potential incompletion? Because that is, I mean, every pass is a 50-50 ball. You never know if you're going to get a drop, a deflect. Like, you never know what's going to happen. Keep the ball on the ground, run that clock. I don't love that play call decision at the end of the game.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think that's what just irritates me with, especially as if I were an Eagles fan, right? That would be the part, because you feel like you're so close. And that's what I hope doesn't come back to catch them in the ass, right? You got a team that is full of very talented guys, but then you look at like their defensive line struggled a lot last night while they've got these big time names. And then there are questions, right? Are you guys missing Jason Kelsey? Are you missing that leadership? And overall, this is a season, in my opinion, where I do think the NFC East is for the taking for them. I do think that the NFC in general is for the taking. Deebo Samuel's hurt. Christian McCaffrey's hurt. The 49ers just lost to the Vikings. There is no time to be wasted for these top-tier contenders. If I'm the Eagles, the team that you're fielding right now, this organization fielding out right now, there's not a whole lot else you can do to say, hey, this team should be a Super Bowl contending team. So they've got 15 weeks to figure it out, and I do think they've got the talent to figure it out. But
they're the most talented roster probably in the NFL. There's no excuse as to why. There ain't no trading. they better figure it out in-house. If not, I know Parker says we shouldn't, and I agree with you, Parker, we shouldn't always just, rush to say it's the quarterback or it's the coach. But something has to be done with Nick Sirianni. If you don't do something, if you can't win with this roster, there's a bigger issue at hand. And this roster is just too talented. Their depth is something that, I think a lot of teams would wish that they had from a starting standpoint.
Yes.
There are some guys you could look at right now. You could say if this Eagles thing starts to sputter a little bit, I'm not saying that it will. It's only week 2 of the NFL, right? It's a lot of season left. But this is a team that has made Devin White inactive, right? This is Devin White who he looked great with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, obviously, before things started to sputter there. But Devin White is inactive, and he's their backup linebacker. Now, great, they have Nakobe Dean, who's been great. But you look at some of the guys that they have from a depth perspective, it's like these are guys that would be starters on other teams, right? So when we look at it, we have to talk about it. We have to say, listen, if the Eagles are the one team that I'm not giving a pass to in the league right now. They got to find a way to get it together. They have to find a way to keep it together. I don't care. I'm not trying to hear about Jason Kelsey retirement. One player doesn't make the whole thing tick. I'll get it. He was a great emotional leader, but we're talking about, and this with all due respect, Parker, our residential offensive line guru. He's a center we're talking about here, right? Great player. One of the best centers that we've seen play the game of football, but that should not be the reason why your defense and your offense and everything just does not tick. That's just my thought process. Let's get over to the conversation at hand, though, Parker. Let's talk about Ja'Marr Chase. But before we do, make sure you guys do us a favor. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications. We appreciate that you guys make TWSN, the Sit Down with Malik Wright morning show, a part of your morning routine. We appreciate that sincerely. Let's talk about Ja'Marr Chase, though. So there are a lot of people that believe that Ja'Marr Chase's overreaction was due to his, I would say, grief he may have with the organization because of the lack of a contract extension. I've shared my thoughts on that a little bit. I'm sure on State of the Jungle, we'll talk about that a lot more. But let's talk about it here, Parker. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on people saying Ja'Marr Chase's reaction on the sideline has to do with him not having a contract in place? And do you really believe that maybe Ja'Marr Chase is disgruntled? I'll tell you right now, Parker, just so you understand my stance, I don't believe that. I believe this has to do everything with the guy that's not being involved in the game plan. The last 2 weeks, he has been used in a way in which hasn't been to his liking. This is a guy that believes that he should be seeing probably 15 targets a game, maybe. This is a guy that believes that he should be a focal point of the offense. And for whatever reason, the Bengals just not have done that. They haven't done that. You look at week one, it was a lot of personnel issues, not having the right guys out there. Week 2, one would be led to think that Ja'Marr Chase might have been strapped up by Trent McDuffie and the Chiefs' defensive back core. But in large part, that was because he wasn't even getting looks. Joe Burrow wasn't even looking at him at points in times. This was a game plan that was heavily involved with the tight ends. But anyway, a lot of people believe that Ja'Marr Chase is disgruntled with the contract. And again, you aren't in Ja'Marr Chase's ear. I'm not in Ja'Marr Chase's ear. But I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, no, I'd have a hard time believing that these whatever issues you might see are stemming from contract worries. I mean, I can see, maybe even, getting after the referee on that potential penalty that I don't really see being a hip drop tackle in general, but I can see, him being worried about his health and, you hear conversations about this insurance policy that he's taken out and this and that. And I mean, I understand all of that perspective, but at the end of the day, I think, game plan, Ja'Marr Chase sees this offense and he sees the number 2 receiver not being involved at all because T. Higgins is not on the field, and that's the true number 2 for this football team. So you got to imagine from his perspective, he thinks I'm the number 1 guy as it is. I should be getting X amount of volume. Now with the number 2 guy out, you shouldn't spread that out between lesser talent. I should just accumulate that volume. Again, it's also a Chiefs team, which he's been outspoken about how much he doesn't like them and how much he wants to beat this team. And, you'd like to see him get more involved. But then again, you look at it from a game planning perspective and he's going to get bracketed. He's going to have that gravity in coverage. He's going to pull defenders that way, which is why you saw a tight end heavy, game plan where you saw a guy like Andre Yosivas getting a lot of run. You saw the run game being leaned on a little bit more, which I don't think is wrong. But then again, as the number one receiver who's not trying to, potentially earn that contract, or you don't know what those conversations were like behind the door, you can see how you can start building that up in your own head. However, I think once you get on the field, it's just more of like he's a guy we saw last year when he was under contract. He still is, but when he wasn't having these conversations, he was still getting frustrated. He was like, "Oh, you ask the organization why I'm not getting targeted. I'm always open. I should be getting the ball." Like that's the player he is, and he wants to be that dynamic, game-changing receiver. And so when he's not getting those opportunities, and then you're watching the game almost from an auxiliary perspective, even though you're on the field, it can be frustrating as you see this kind of going the way that it went, the struggles that you do have, whether it's the fumble six or whether it's other incompletions and drops that were throughout the game. It did happen. You can see all that kind of build up when you're not able to get your hands on the ball and try and be a dynamic playmaker. I think that's where all the frustration came from. It's a game that he really wants to win. It's a game that he really wants to pop off in, and he just wasn't used. Whether or not it was the right call is a different conversation, but you can see why he'd be frustrated with just how the game went. Not necessarily involving the contract talks. I mean, you can maybe tinfoil hat that and put that together, but I think it really is just a guy that really wants to get involved in this game and just didn't.
Completely. And I think, Parker, one of the things that you mentioned that is, I think that people are kind of forgetting about is this is the type of, look at what he did last year, right? The conversation before the Arizona Cardinals game. Hey, like, I'm always open. And
Yeah.
I think that should show, yes, he should have kept his emotions in check. I don't think we're disagreeing with that, right? That cost his team 15 yards. That cost his team a lot. But this is a dude who has been time and time again on the record stating he is the best wide receiver in the NFL. He believes he's the best. And when you believe you're the best, you are going to be overly confident. You're going to be confident in your abilities. And rightfully so, you're going to be upset and you're going to be pissed off if you are only getting targeted on curl routes, if you're only getting targeted on 3 to 5 yard passes. And that's where I think I'm with you. I think his frustration is coming from. And we discussed this on one of the shows, Malik, right? Is that a head coach's job and a play caller's job is not just calling plays, but you do have to manage personalities. And that's kind of the hard part about, the NFL, especially, is if you have a star wide receiver, you've got to figure out how do you get this guy more involved in the game plan, whether it's on, the first drive of the game, get him more involved in the quick slant game, get him more involved, just get some manufactured touches to him so that he can feel like he's more involved. And it'll get him more in a rhythm. So I'm with you. I think that this isn't the first time we've seen frustration from Jamar Chase. And I think the dude just wants the ball in his hands. And we looked at, he's got 9 targets or 9 catches through the first 2 weeks of the season. That's not the Jamar Chase we know. And I know damn well that that's not what he wants. He wants more. And I think he was frustrated. And overall, you look at it was a 5-yard pass and he got tackled and it didn't get much after that. He was frustrated. I think there were a lot of external factors as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think it's okay to have a healthy discourse and realize that, that's a guy that is an alpha male at his position. He's the reason why, not even diving into it, but, NFL players around the league respect him. It's the reason why people run to have that guy on their fantasy football team. It's the reason why we're expecting him to break the bank and be the highest paid receiver in the National Football League when his time does come. Listen, Jamar Chase is who Jamar Chase is, right? Unapologetically himself. Again, I still believe that keeping emotions in check are important to your team's success, to your success. And it was a moment where it got away from him a little bit like that, but I don't think it had anything in that moment to do with the contract. I don't think anybody was thinking like, hey, you know what? He's upset because he wants a contract. He needs a contract in place. And so that's why he's playing the way he has. Parker, were there any week 2 takeaways of the NFL season that you saw, my man, that you wanted to discuss? We always give you an opportunity to maybe talk about a team, a player, maybe that went under the radar, a team that really impressed you.
Yeah, my honorable mention for the week's got to be, is this Cleveland's Brown team really just this big of a force where they're just going to cause all these teams problems? I know it's been a great defensive team, but I didn't think it was going to be this like, oh, we're just going to cause opposing quarterbacks to just melt down. We've seen them do it to Joe Burrow. I think we saw it happen to Trevor Lawrence this week. That's just kind of something that I'm going to be watching throughout the year. But the team I want to talk about, the biggest, most surprising team for me so far through 2 weeks has been this New Orleans Saints team, man. Like, what is going on down in NOLA? Because they are taking it to teams that aren't necessarily bad football teams.
I agree with you, man. The Saints look like absolute world beaters right now. And again, just waiting to see if it cools off because Derek Carr is who Derek Carr is. I believe that.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I'm kind of hiding away a little bit because I kind of ripped into them this offseason. Um, and well, like I said, we'll see. I'm a jerk, so we'll see. We'll
It's
see.
early.
We'll see how it pans out. So hit me up after week 5, okay? We'll see if they're still putting up the same numbers. If they are, then you know what? Maybe I was wrong. If they aren't, then I'll parade around here saying I told y'all so. But in all seriousness, Parker, want to thank you so much for joining the show. You know what's funny? I was looking at your tweets. I would say on Sunday, and were you giving out a little betting advice? Did I see that correctly?
Hey, I've dabbled in the past. I've
Okay.
dabbled. I like playing around a little bit. So
I hear you. I hear you. No, I saw my guy giving out some bet. I said, all right, okay. Love to see that, man. But no, Parker will be joining us back on Thursday on the show, man. I want to thank you so much for joining us, spending your Tuesday with the Sit Down with Malik Wright morning show and crew TWSN here. Make sure you guys follow Parker Blake and all his awesome work that he does for us and other outlets as well. Parker, until Thursday, my man, we appreciate you.
hey, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's always a good conversation.
Yes,
Take it
sir.
easy.
Yes, sir.
Catch you, Parker.
So that was Parker Blake, TWSN analyst here, and we love discussing football with him. You should follow him. He does some fantastic work, especially on the offensive line, but also beyond that. Let's discuss some of our bets this past week, Danny, or your bets first per se. This is where we kind of just go on what went right, what went wrong, where we see ourselves going into this upcoming week. But again, want to thank you guys for spending your morning with us. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications. Daniel, the floor is yours, my man.
Yeah, so once again, guys, if you guys want a full best bet, you guys can go down to the description. We've got a Patreon, our whole entire team talking college football, NFL, and we had a pretty good week. Monday Night Football was nice to us. Saquon Barkley cash was over receiving yards. We had Devontae Smith cash was over receptions, as well as we had Bijan Robinson catches over in catches. But over on the week, it was a very, very positive week. We'll just run through a couple of these. First off, the one that we discussed on the show was Bengals +6. And the reason why this one that went right was the fact that this spread was too large. And especially early on in the season, you guys have to look at specific trends. And that's what we're here for, right? To tell you guys the trends. Go look at previous matchups before, between the Chiefs and the Bengals. And we weren't looking too deep into week 1 because teams in week 1 that tend to have lost the next week, they're up. I believe it was 59%, against the spread. And you look at the Chiefs team, they didn't dominate in week 1. So +6 was an easy cash. The Bengals arguably could have won that game. They were up by 2. And honestly, the entire game +6 was not a sweat at all. So Bengals +6 was one of my, best reason. We discussed this. One of the worst ones I will say, Malik, that I definitely had was I went and picked the Cowboys to cover the spread against the Saints. And that was definitely a horrendous one. And the reason why, in hindsight, what I can definitely use as analysis was don't read into the Cowboys in week 1, right? Go look at each specific matchup. I read too much into the week 1 matchup, and they didn't look impressive in week 1. Their defense looked good, but it was more so a thing of look at their opposing matchup. And that's why you guys can't read too much in a previous matchups. Like, whatever happened last week stays in last week, and it doesn't always carry over into the next week. So that was one of the things that I looked at in the Cowboys matchup was, hey, they dominated against the Browns. Their defense made the Browns offense look like complete trash, and the Saints are going to regress after week 1. No, Clint Kubiak went and put on a masterclass against the Dallas Cowboys. So he absolutely destroyed them. And then you go look at a couple more of our better picks, I would say, was you go look at the game, the Arizona Cardinals against the Rams. We had the Cardinals, covering the spread against the Rams, and that was one of the better ones, right? You go look at a Rams team that was without Puka Nacua, lost two of their offensive linemen, dealing with major injuries. And they're playing a divisional matchup against an offense in the Cardinals that the Cardinals offense looked great in week 1, right? They looked great. They had Trey McBride, Greg Dortch was getting involved, and Marvin Harrison did absolutely nothing week 1. And the Cardinals offense still looked good against the Buffalo Bills. They were still in that game. So carrying over into week 2, they were underdogs against the Los Angeles Rams, and they went and they absolutely took it to them. So that was one of my favorites, I would say.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you guys so much for spending your mornings with us on the Sit Down with Malik Wright morning show. We'll be back here tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. for State of the Jungle. We'll be back on the Sit Down with Malik morning show on Thursday at 10 a.m. We appreciate you guys for making us a part of your morning routinely each and every day. Remember, there's only one way that you should wake up, talk sports, watch sports, join in the discussion, and that is